She was few steps away from the street and a clean escape when the elevator doors hissed open, revealing a ghost tailored in a three-piece suit. Jekyll Y didn't just walk out, he reclaimed the air in the room, his gaze pinning her to the marble floor like a butterfly under glass. She was clutching a document case filled with her secrets, and he was the hunter who had just bought the entire forest to find her. The elevator chime was the only warning. Nade's face stood frozen, her fingers white-knuckled around the handle of her document case. Behind her, Mr. Park was still shouting, his voice a grating backdrop to the sudden silence that swept the lobby. But Nade didn't hear him. The heavy doors slid back, and the air in the lobby seemed to drop 20 degrees. Jekyll Y stepped forward. The sunlight from the floor-to-ceiling windows hit the sharp line of his jaw, making him look less like a man and more like a statue carved from obsidian. He stopped just inches from her, his presence an invisible wall. For 4 years, she had looked for this face in every crowded street and dark alleyway, and now, here it was, stern, controlled, and burning with a terrifying recognition. Going somewhere, Nade? His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that cut through Mr. Park's tirade like a blade through silk. Nade didn't flinch. She adjusted her blazer, her dark eyes meeting his intense, authoritative stare. She wasn't the scared girl who ran 4 years ago. She was a woman who had built herself from nothing. "I'm leaving, Jekyll," she said, her voice quiet but vibrating with a strength that made his security detail shift uneasily. "This is a place of business, and I no longer work here." Y leaned in, his shadow swallowing her whole. "That's the problem with ghosts, Nade. They think they can choose when to appear and when to fade. But I just bought this company. Which means I own your contract. And I'm not finished with your design." Nade stood in the middle of the most expensive office she had ever seen. She was still clutching her brown document case like a shield. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. Just 5 minutes ago, she was being yelled at in a hallway. Now, she was staring at Jekyll Y. He sat behind a desk made of dark, polished wood that looked out over the massive skyscrapers of the Muriong business district. The city below was a sea of glass and steel, and it felt like Y owned every inch of it. "Sit down, Nade," Y said. His voice was smooth, like dark chocolate, but it had a sharp edge that made her stay standing. "I'm not sitting," Nade snapped. Her short curls bounced as she shook her head. "I'm leaving. I was just fired, remember? I need to go home and figure out how to pay my rent." Y leaned back. A small, dangerous smile played on his lips. "You weren't just fired, Nade. I bought this firm an hour ago through my holding company, the Hanyang Group. And the first thing I did as the owner was look into your manager, Mr. Park. The man was stealing from the company and blaming you. I fired him to keep your record clean. I didn't want you dragged down when the police arrived." Nade blinked. Her anger didn't go away, it just changed shape. "You bought a whole company just to fire my boss? That is not romantic, Y. That is completely deranged." "I prefer the word thorough," he replied calmly. He stood up and walked around the desk. He stopped just a few inches away. The scent of his expensive cologne filled her senses. "You disappeared 4 years ago. You left a 3-word note and vanished. I don't do well with unfinished business. I left because I found out who you really are." Nade whispered, her eyes flashing. "I'm an architect. I build things. Your family, they destroy things. Which is exactly why I'm giving you a job," Y said. He held out a folder. "Be my lead compliance consultant for Hanyang. Help me turn this empire into something legal. Use those high morals of yours to keep me on the right path." Nade laughed, a dry, sharp sound. "And if I say no?" Y shrugged. "Then I enforce the non-compete clause in your original contract. Since Hanyang owns the company now, I can make sure you don't work for another architecture firm in this country for at least 2 years. You'll be blacklisted before you reach the lobby." Nade's jaw dropped. "You're blackmailing me? In a suit?" The door opened suddenly. Wai's assistant, a young man named Sang-min, walked in. He was carrying a small, sad-looking potted plant. "Sir?" The previous manager left this. He said it was the only thing of value Miss Fay had left at her desk. Nade grabbed the plant. It was her cactus, Gerald. She tried to look tall and professional while hugging a prickly plant to her chest. It was hard to look like a serious rebel when you were worried about a cactus needle poking your chin. Sang-min looked back and forth between the boss and the woman holding a plant, looking completely confused. "Fine," Nade hissed, pointing a finger at Wai, carefully avoiding Gerald's thorns. "I'll take the job. But I want a written contract. I want professional boundaries. And I want an office on a completely different floor from you." "I agree to the contract and the boundaries," Wai said, stepping even closer. "But your office is right next to mine. I need to keep my consultant close." An hour later, Nade sat in her new office. She looked at the view of Myeong. She looked at Gerald, who sat on the marble windowsill. She realized she had just signed a contract with the most powerful man in the underworld. "Well, Gerald," she whispered. "We're in it now." Nade's first week at the Hanyang group felt like trying to organize a hurricane. She was determined to be the most professional consultant in Myeong. She wore her sharpest blazer every day and kept her hair perfectly neat. But Wai made it very difficult. He didn't just stay in his office, he hovered. He would show up at her desk just to ask how Gerald the cactus was doing, or he would accidentally schedule meetings that lasted through lunch just so he could order her favorite spicy noodles. As she dug into the company files, Nade realized Wai wasn't joking about wanting to go legal. Hanyang owned hotels, shipping companies, and tech firms. But mixed in were less official businesses that made her head spin. She spent her mornings meeting his core team. There was Kwon, a scary lieutenant with a scar on his neck who watched her like she was a ticking bomb. Then there was Mr. Song, a genius accountant with messy hair who looked like he hadn't slept since the company was founded. Mr. Song almost cried with joy when Nade showed him how to use a color-coded spreadsheet to track expenses. The humor of the situation hit her during a meeting with Kwon about a shipping manifest. "Kwon, you can't just list miscellaneous for a shipment of 500 unmarked crates," Nade said, rubbing her temples. "What if we get audited by the government? They'll have questions." Kwon leaned forward, his face dead serious. "If they ask questions, we shoot the auditors?" Nade's eyes went wide. "No. We do not shoot the auditors. We use proper shell corporation structures like civilized criminals." "Honestly, do you want to go to jail?" "Because that's how you go to jail." From the doorway, she heard a low, rich chuckle. Wai was leaning against the frame, looking amused. "Listen to her, Kwon," Wai said. "She's the boss of the books now." That night, Wai insisted she attend a business dinner. Nade thought it would be a normal restaurant, but it was a private club filled with men who had cold eyes and expensive watches. These were the rival syndicate leaders of the Myeong district. The air was thick with coded threats. Every time a man talked about cleaning up the streets, Nade knew they weren't talking about trash. She felt completely out of her element until a drunk associate from a rival group stumbled toward her. He reached out to grab her arm, leaning in way too close. Before he could touch her, a hand made of iron gripped the man's wrist. Wai stepped between them, his body a solid wall of protection. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes made the drunk man turn pale and vanish into the crowd instantly. Wai turned to her, his expression softening immediately. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. For a second, Nade forgot about the Mafia and the danger. She only saw the man who had spent 4 years looking for her. That was the first crack in her armor. He was protective, steady, and dangerously charming. Back at her apartment that night, Nade sat on her sofa with a notepad. She started making a pros and cons list. Under pros, she wrote, "Good salary, excellent health insurance, and he is still unfairly hot." Under cons, she wrote in big, messy letters, "Literal mafia, high chance of danger, and I am definitely falling for him again." She sighed and looked at the list. Just as she was about to go to bed, a rock suddenly shattered her window, landing right next to Gerald the cactus. Attached to the rock was a note that read, "A ghost should stay dead. Leave Hanyang or you'll be buried under it." Nade didn't wait for the sun to come up. The second that rock shattered her window, she was on the phone, her hands shaking so hard she almost dropped it. Y answered on the first ring. Within 10 minutes, 3 black SUVs had pulled up outside, and Quan was at her door with a team of guards. They taped up the broken glass with heavy plastic and stayed in the hallway all night. Nade didn't sleep, she sat on her kitchen floor, staring at the front door and jumping at every tiny sound. By the time she arrived at the Hanyang Group office in Myeong the next morning, she was exhausted and furious. But things only got worse. 2 men in stiff gray suits were waiting in the lobby. They flashed federal badges and led her into a cold meeting room. They spent 3 hours asking about her past with Jekyll Y. Nade kept her voice steady despite her fatigue. She told them the truth. For years ago, she was just a girl in love. She had no idea his family ran the most powerful syndicate in the district. Once the investigators finally left, Nade marched straight into Y's office. She slammed the threatening note from her apartment on his desk. "The feds are treating me like a criminal and someone tried to break into my home last night. Why? You said I'd be safe, but I'm being hunted." Y stood up slowly. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "I know. My men are at your apartment right now replacing the glass with reinforced panels. I bought this company specifically to find you, Nade, because I knew I couldn't protect you if you were a ghost living in the shadows." "Searching for me? You have all the money in the world." Nade's eyes filled with hot tears. "Why didn't you just call me? Why let me live in fear for 4 years?" "Because my world was exactly what you were running from," Y said softly, walking around his desk. "I had to build something legal before I could ask you to be part of it. When you left that note saying you couldn't live in my world, it woke me up. I realized I didn't want the power if it meant losing you. I've been trying to go legal ever since, but my father's old enemies won't let me leave easily." Nade wiped her eyes, trying to stay mad, but the honesty in his voice made her chest ache. She used humor to keep her guard up. "I can't believe you. You're telling me you'd never lie to me again?" "I wouldn't," Y insisted, his dark eyes intense. "I would never lie about how I feel." Nade looked at him flatly. "Just about your job, your family, and your entire identity? Oh, and the fact that you're the scariest man in Myeong?" Y paused, a tiny, awkward smile touching his lips. "Well, when you put it that way, it does sound a bit bad." He turned to his desk and showed her his plan for making the company 100% legal. It was a complete disaster. There were coffee stains, messy arrows, and confusing notes everywhere. "I'm a builder of empires, Nade, not a builder of rules. I need your help to fix the foundation of this company so the feds have nothing to find." Nade looked at the messy plans and sighed. She looked over at the office windowsill, where the cactus she had left behind at her old job was now sitting in a new, expensive pot. "Fine. I'll help you fix this mess. But let's be clear, this is a professional consultation. I am your consultant, not your girlfriend. We are strictly business." Y nodded, but his eyes sparkled with a look she remembered from 4 years ago. "Professional consultation. Of course." Nade turned to leave, but as she reached for her door handle, she noticed something strange. A small, red laser dot was dancing on the carpet near her feet. It moved from the floor, up her blazer, and stopped right on the center of her chest. Someone wasn't waiting for her to leave the building to make their next move. The red laser dot on Nade's chest vanished the second Y tackled her to the floor. He didn't use a weapon, he just used his body to shield her until Quan slammed the heavy metal shutters over the windows. It was a drone, Quan barked into his radio. Just a warning from the rivals. Nade sat on the plush carpet, her heart hammering. "Is this part of the health insurance plan?" she gasped, trying to find her breath. Y didn't laugh. He looked terrified for her. He told her she couldn't go home yet. Instead, he took her to the one place he promised she would be safe, his mother's house. The Jekyll estate in the Muriong Valley was a fortress of white marble. Nade felt tiny as she walked through the massive doors. She was wearing a borrowed silk dress that cost more than her college degree. At the end of a long, dark table sat Lady Jekyll. The woman was beautiful but looked as though she were carved out of ice. She stared at Nade with a sharp gaze. "So," Lady Jekyll said, her voice like a cold breeze. "You are the African woman who made my son go insane. He used to talk about expansion. Now he talks about spreadsheets." The dinner was a nightmare of rules. There were 6 different spoons and 3 sets of chopsticks. Nade picked up a small, silver tool and tried to use it on a piece of fish, only to realize it was actually for the soup. Lady Jekyll said something in a very polite, soft tone. Nade smiled, thinking it was a compliment. Later, she would find out it was a subtle insult about her hair. Trying to be brave, Nade cleared her throat. "So, crime," she said, trying to make small talk. "That is quite a family business. Is it nice to work with your relatives? My cousins usually just argue over who gets the last piece of chicken at a barbecue." Lady Jekyll didn't even crack a smile. She put down her tea and looked Nade in the eye. "You are a distraction, Miss Fay. You will hurt my son's reputation and put his life in danger. People in our world do not like clean business. I will give you a check for any amount you want. Take it and leave Muriong tonight. Go back to your buildings and your cactus." Nade looked at the blank check. She thought about the laser dot and the rock through her window. She felt a spark of anger. She pushed the check back across the silk tablecloth. "I don't want your money," Nade said, her voice surprisingly strong. "But I will tell you this. If Y looks me in the eye and tells me he wants me to leave, I will walk out that door for free. Until then, I have work to do. His company is a mess, and I'm the only one who knows how to fix the foundations." The heavy door swung open. Y walked in, looking tired and disheveled from a business emergency. He stopped when he saw the check and his mother's frozen expression. He walked straight to Nade, standing right behind her chair. "She stays, Mother," Y said, his voice deep and final. "She is the only real thing in this house. Get used to it." In the car ride back to the city, the silence was heavy. Nade was shaking from the adrenaline and the fear. She stared out at the dark trees of Muriong, feeling the weight of the Jekyll name. Suddenly, she felt a warm, large hand cover hers. Y held her hand tightly, his thumb rubbing small circles against her skin. For the first time in 4 years, Nade didn't pull away. She just closed her eyes and let him hold her. The silence in the car after the dinner didn't last long. By the next morning, the professional world Nade was trying to build started to crumble. The Han Group, Y's biggest rivals, had decided that if they couldn't scare Y with rocks and drones, they would ruin his reputation instead. They sent a massive file to the federal regulators. It was filled with photos of Nade and Y from 4 years ago, along with lies claiming she was helping him hide illegal money. If the government believed these lies, Nade would never work as an architect again. Her license would be taken away, and her name would be blacklisted globally. The pressure didn't stop there. Nade received a terrifying phone call from her mother back home, saying strange men in suits had been asking questions about her daughter's shady business in Muriong. Y immediately moved Nade into a high-security suite at the Hanyang Group headquarters. She was surrounded by guards 24 hours a day. Every time she looked out the window, she saw black cars following her every move. The reality of his world hit her like a cold wave. This wasn't a movie or a fairy tale. Being with Y meant her entire future was on the line. One evening, Y found her staring at a blank computer screen. He looked older, his eyes heavy with guilt. He sat across from her and spoke in a low, serious voice. "Nade, I promise to protect you, but I am the reason you are in danger. If you want to leave, I have a plan. I can get you new credentials, a new identity, and a flight to any city in the world. I will give you a fresh start, and I won't stop you this time. I won't even try to find you. Nade looked at him for a long time. She thought about the 4 years she spent running. She realized that running hadn't actually kept her safe, it had just kept her afraid. I'm not running again, why, she said, her voice firm. I tried that, and it didn't work. But if I stay, we do this my way. No more secrets. Everything must be legitimate. Every penny, every meeting, and every contract must be documented perfectly. We are going to beat them with the truth. The tension in the room broke slightly, and Nade shifted back into her boss of the books mode. The next morning, she was already in the security room, looking over the team's logs. Quan, the scary lieutenant, looked annoyed. Miss Fay, we have been doing security for 20 years, he grumbled. Nade didn't back down. She tapped her clipboard. And I have been following rules for 20 years. Your guards are too obvious. You're making us targets. From now on, we are using the corporate logistics schedule to hide our movements. Now we're combining your muscle with my math. You're welcome. Quan looked at Y, hoping for help. Y was leaning against the wall, watching Nade with a look of pure adoration. Don't look at me, Quan, Y said with a grin. She's terrifying when she has a plan. I love it. Quan sighed and walked away, leaving the two of them alone in the quiet office. Y walked over to her, his shadow falling over her desk. The humor faded, replaced by something much deeper. You're sure about this? He whispered. There's no going back once we start this fight. I'm sure, Nade replied. Y leaned in, his hand gently cupping her face. This time, there were no investigators, no mothers, and no rivals. There was only the truth between them. When he finally kissed her, it felt like the last 4 years of searching had finally ended. They both knew this changed everything. They were no longer just a boss and a consultant, they were a team. The following weeks in Murion were not about decorations or dreams, they were a war of paperwork. Nade realized quickly that you couldn't just turn off a mafia empire. She spent her days acting as an external auditor, digging through years of hidden accounts to find a way to make the Hanyang Group look clean to the government. She restructured the shipping companies into legitimate logistics firms and moved the family's assets into high-tech real estate. It was exhausting work that required her to be tougher than any lieutenant. Y and Nade became a formidable team, but the tension in the office was rising. While Y used his power to keep his men in line, Nade used her brilliant mind to find the holes in their stories. Even the most skeptical associates, like the scarred Lieutenant Quan, started to look at her with a mix of respect and fear. They realized she was the only one smart enough to keep them out of prison. However, the change didn't happen without some funny but sharp arguments. One afternoon, Nade walked into Y's office waving a ledger. "Why, you absolutely cannot write business stuff in the ledger under the expenses column," she shouted. Y looked up from his desk, looking genuinely confused. "Why not?" It was for business, and it was definitely stuff. Nade put her hands on her hips. Because I have professional standards. If an auditor sees business stuff for a $10,000 charge, they will arrest us both. You need to list it as operational consultation or I am quitting again. Y just chuckled and held up his hands. Okay. From now on, I'll use your boring words. The hard work finally paid off when their first truly legal acquisition went through. Hanyang Group bought a major tech firm using money that Nade had spent weeks cleaning through legal business channels. For the first time, every single document was perfect. There were no bribes or hidden bags of cash. It was a clean win, but it came with a price. Many of Y's older associates were angry. They were losing the fast, untaxed money they were used to, and they blamed the architect girl for their smaller paychecks. To celebrate the milestone, Nade decided to stop living like a guest. She moved a few boxes of her books and her most comfortable pillows into Y's place. It was a small gesture, but it was her way of saying she was committed to this fight. Even Gerald the cactus got an upgrade. Nade moved him into a much larger, beautiful ceramic pot that sat in the center of Y's living room window. He's growing into his potential, Nade said, patting the side of the pot. Just like us. Y stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He's much pricklier than you, though, he whispered, making her laugh. But the piece was a lie. Late that night, while the city of Myeryong slept, a computer screen in a dark corner of the office flickered to life. One of Y's own high-level employees was typing a message. They weren't sending it to a rival gang. They were sending a detailed, anonymous tip directly to the lead federal investigators. They knew that if Nade and Y succeeded in going legal, the old way of life, and the easy money, would be gone forever. The real betrayal wasn't coming from the outside, it was coming from the very people they were trying to save. The celebration from the night before felt like a distant memory when the morning news broke. Documents leaked to the public showed that Hanyang Group was still involved in shady deals. These were contracts Y had never signed and deals he had never authorized. Someone inside the organization was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for the police. The federal investigators returned to the office, and this time, they didn't have any smiles. They took Nade into a small room and showed her the new evidence. They told her she was either a criminal or a fool being used by a dangerous man. Nade walked out of the interrogation feeling sick. She found Y in the security room, staring at the monitors. He looked like he had been hit by a truck. "It's not the new company," he whispered. "And it's not the rivals." He played a video file that showed a high-level assistant from the executive floor meeting a government agent in a dark parking garage. The assistant wasn't working for money, they were carrying a folder with the private seal of the Jekyll family. Nade realized the truth instantly. "It's your mother," she breathed. Lady Jekyll wasn't just testing Nade, she was actively trying to destroy the transition to legal business. She believed that going legal made the family weak and easy to kill. To her, the only way to stay safe was to stay scary. She had been feeding secrets to the rivals and the police to force Y to give up on his clean dream and return to his father's old, violent ways. Y didn't wait. He drove straight to the family estate with Nade right beside him. The confrontation in the marble hallway was cold and quiet. Lady Jekyll stood by the fireplace, looking as calm as a statue. "I am saving you, Y," she said. "Without our reputation for being dangerous, we are just another target. This woman is making you soft." Y stood tall, his voice shaking with anger. "I am not soft, Mother. I am tired of living in a cage of fear. If being part of this family means staying a criminal, then I don't want the name." In that moment, Y made his choice. He chose Nade and the hard path of legitimacy over his mother's protection. Lady Jekyll's face turned into a mask of stone. "Then you are on your own," she said. "Don't come back when the wolves are at your door." As they walked out, Nade felt the weight of the world shift. By losing his mother's support, Y had lost his biggest shield. They were now completely vulnerable to both the law and their enemies. As they drove back toward Myeryong, Nade tried to use her humor to stop herself from crying. "You know, Y," she said, looking out the window. "Your mom sabotaged a multi-million-dollar business deal just to make you dump me. That is Olympic-level disapproving mother-in-law behavior." Y gripped the steering wheel, a sad smile appearing for a second. "She does believe in making her point. I suppose I get my persistence from her." The humor faded as they saw the flashing lights of police cars outside the Hanyang Group headquarters. The investigation was no longer just a few questions, it was a full-scale raid. They had no protection, no family network, and very little time. They needed a strategy fast, or the dream of a clean life would end in a prison cell. The morning of the hearing was the hardest day of Nade's life. Before she even reached for her suit, she had to run to the bathroom. Her stomach felt like it was on a stormy sea. At first, she thought it was just the fear of the courtroom, but as she sat on the floor breathing deeply, she realized the truth. She was pregnant. She was carrying a child into a world where the windows were bulletproof and the grandmothers were dangerous. She didn't have time to process the news because the black car was already waiting to take her to the federal courthouse in Myeong. Wai met her in the hallway of the courthouse. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He took her hands in his eyes full of worry. "Nade, the prosecution is going to offer you a deal. They want to give you immunity and a new life in a different country. You can walk away from all of this. I won't ask you to lie for me. Just tell the truth and save yourself." Nade looked at him, her heart breaking. She knew that if she just told the truth about his past, he would go to prison, and she would be alone with their baby. When Nade took the stand, the room was silent. The lead prosecutor leaned forward, his voice sharp. He asked her about the corruption at her old firm and Wai's sudden takeover. Nade looked at Wai in the gallery. He gave her a small, sad nod. She took a deep breath and began to speak. She didn't lie. She told them her old boss was a thief. She told them Wai bought the company to find her. But then, she revealed her secret weapon. She pulled a thick digital drive from her bag. "You think this is about a mafia boss buying a firm," Nade said, her voice growing stronger. "But for the last few months, I have been documenting every single dollar. I haven't been hiding his past, I have been building a map of how to fix the future. I have evidence of every rival group in Myeong that refused to change. I have the records of the people who tried to stop us from going legal." She made them an offer they couldn't refuse. She would work with the federal task force as a consultant to show them exactly how organized crime hides its money. She would help them clean up the whole city from the inside. The courtroom exploded in whispers. It was a massive gamble. The prosecution realized that Nade was more valuable as a partner than a prisoner. After hours of private meetings, they accepted the deal. Wai would stay under strict government supervision while he turned his empire legal, and in exchange, Nade would provide the evidence to take down the rival syndicates who were still committing crimes. They had won, but they were now the most famous reformers in Myeong. When they finally stepped outside the courthouse, the sun was bright. Reporters were everywhere, but Wai's guards kept them back. Nade leaned against the stone pillar, her face pale. Wai put his arm around her. "You did it, Nade. You outmaneuvered the smartest lawyers in the country. How are you feeling?" Nade looked at him and smiled through her tears. "I'm feeling like I need a nap. And I'm feeling like you should know that you're going to be a father." Wai stopped walking. He stared at her, his mouth falling open. Then, the man who was feared by everyone in Myeong broke down. He dropped to his knees right there on the courthouse steps, crying happy tears as he hugged her waist. "You just saved my life and changed the world while you were pregnant," he sobbed, looking up at her with pure love. "Nade Faye, marry me. Right now. Before you find another way to beat me at something." 3 years passed like a fast-moving dream. The scary shadows of Myeong were gone, replaced by the bright glass walls of the new Jekyll Corporation. The company was now fully legitimate and traded on the stock market. Every dollar was accounted for, and the government investigators had finally stopped knocking on their doors. Nade was no longer just a consultant, she was the head of her own firm that helped other big companies follow the rules. She was also very pregnant with their second child, though she still moved through the office with the same boss energy she had on her first day. Their 2-year-old daughter, Hannah, was the real boss of the building. She often sat in the big board meetings with Wai, busy drawing colorful monsters all over his expensive folders. Wai didn't mind at all. In fact, he looked more proud of her drawings than he did of his billion-dollar deals. Life was chaotic but loving and normal. Even Kwon had changed. He was now the head of a professional security firm. He spent his days checking high-tech badges and cameras instead of guarding dark alleys. He even carried Hannah's pink backpack sometimes, looking very serious while doing it. Even Lady Jekyll had slowly come around. She still visited for Sunday dinners, and while she was still a bit cold, she grudgingly admitted that Nade had saved the family from total ruin. She often watched her granddaughter play and whispered that the girl had the Jekyll eyes, which was her version of a big compliment. Meanwhile, Gerald the cactus had grown so large that he had his own spot in a sun-drenched office. His title on the door officially read Chief Morale Officer. One afternoon, the same prosecutor who had once tried to put Y in jail came to see Nade. He looked tired. "Nade, I have another case," he said, leaning against her desk. "There is a major syndicate in the South that wants to go legitimate. They saw what you did here. They want your help." He looked at Y, then back at Nade. "Tell me the truth. How did you know a man like him could actually change?" Nade looked at Y, who was trying to convince Hannah not to eat a crayon. She laughed softly. "I didn't know for sure. But he bought an entire company just because I wouldn't text him back. I figured that level of petty determination could achieve anything." That evening, they celebrated their anniversary. It had been 6 years since Nade had ghosted him and left that note in the cardboard box. They sat on their balcony overlooking the twinkling lights of Muriong. "Best thing you ever did for me was run away," Y said, pulling her close. Nade leaned her head on his shoulder. "Oh, really? Because it gave you time to plan your elaborate stalking?" Y grinned. "I prefer to call it strategic persistence." Little Hannah looked up from her toys and giggled. "Daddy's silly," she chirped. Nade kissed the top of her head. "Yes, he is. But he's our silly." The final scene of their day was a family photo taken in the grand lobby. They looked professional, legitimate, and truly happy. Hanging on the wall behind them was a small, framed photo of the old cardboard box Nade had used to pack her things years ago. It was a reminder of where they started and how far they had come. As the sun set, Nade walked past Gerald's office and patted his pot. "You knew all along, didn't you?" she whispered. Gerald, being a plant, obviously said nothing. But as the golden light hit his needles, it almost looked like he was standing a little taller. If plants could smile, Gerald would have been beaming. "Thank you for going on this journey with me. I hope you enjoyed the story of Nade, Y, and Gerald the cactus."